In B, we again want to factor first. We want to be able to look at the factors for restrictions and to get common denominators. So factoring the numerator here, I'm going to factor the common factor of 5x. So this is not a quadratic with two brackets. It's just going to be a greatest common factor of 5x. And then left behind is going to be an x plus 2. Again, we can always check that by expanding that out. In the denominator, we're going to have two numbers that multiply to 6, -6, and add to -1 is going to be -3, +2. Those will cancel out, and just to note, we should simplify the fraction before we find a common denominator. Otherwise, our denominator can be bigger than we need it to be. So in this case here, we have x minus 2, and that's all over the factored form is going to be two numbers that multiply to 3 and add to -4 are going to be -1 and -3. Okay, so stating my restrictions first. I always have to state restrictions before I cancel anything. X cannot be equal to +3, -2, +3, which I'm not going to write down again, and +1. Those are my restrictions based on the denominator. Now, I want to find a common denominator to add and subtract. However, before I do that, I really should simplify the fraction before I find a common denominator. And I can do that since I've stated my restrictions already. This makes the denominator less than what we need it to be. So instead of having an extra x plus 2, which I need to multiply on this side, x plus 2, x plus 2, we don't need that anymore because that is not part of the factors on the left-hand side. So the right-hand fraction already has a common denominator. We're just left with using an x minus 1 factor on the bottom and the top. Okay, make sure we balance the fraction. Now we have a common denominator. And there's not 3 factors in there, there's only 2, and that's much better than having 3 factors in the denominator. So I'm going to expand out the brackets, so I get 5x squared minus 5x minus, now be careful with this minus because we're going to subtract everything in the numerator here, so that's going to end up being a +2 and not a -2. So the common denominator of x minus 1, x minus 3 is there. I can combine like terms. Minus 6x plus 2. And that's all over my common denominator of x minus 1, x minus 3. Now, if you didn't cancel, it will still be correct, but you would end up with a cubic in the numerator, cubic in the denominator, 3 factors in the denominator, and there would be a common factor that you would need to factor out to be able to simplify this. At this point, it's going to be much easier to check this factor here. Okay, we're going to check to see if that is factorable. So I'm going to do my 5x squared plus 2. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 10 and add to 6. No numbers exist that do that. So this is not factorable. Okay, so not factorable. So we can just leave it like that. Okay, and that's our final answer here then. So solving the rational equations, again, we want to state restrictions, but we want to get rid of all the divides. So to state the restrictions, we're going to first factor the denominator. So we end up with x minus 3, x minus 1 equals 0. I need to state restrictions. I can see that I can cancel here. So just to note that these will cancel, but before we cancel, we have to state the restrictions. So x is not equal to 3 and +1. Those will give us divide by 0, so we need to state those restrictions. Once we have those restrictions, we want to cancel those out. We want to cancel this out, simplify fractions before you get rid of denominators. Because now we don't have to multiply through with the x minus 3. We now can just multiply by the common denominator of 2 times x minus 1. And this simplifies my equation greatly because notice that we lose an x in the numerator. We lose an x in the numerator in this part here. So that allows us to deal with smaller terms when we're solving this equation. So multiplying through then, I'm going to multiply, the 2 cancels out. So we're left with x minus 1 here. Be careful with that negative. Okay, I'm going to put everything in brackets here because whatever I end up with is 6. The x minus 1's cancel out. This ends up being just one term. So this isn't as much of an issue as it was if we had a binomial. And now the denominator, oops, sorry. I got rid of the denominator in this case. So get rid of that. So I multiplied through by that denominator. I need to do both sides of the equation to keep it balanced. But when I multiply 0 times anything, I get 0 on the right-hand side. So now I'm going to go ahead and solve. X squared minus x minus 12 equals 0. This is factorable. X minus 4, x plus 3. And again, if you get stuck factoring, you don't need to factor this. You can always put it into quadratic formula. So the answer we get is x equals 4, x equals negative 3.